being here. Wow, what a great turnout. Everyone looks so amazing and fresh, and thank God the weather is holding up for us today. So I'd like to say I'm delighted to be at Dovehouse Green today for the unveiling of the Oscar Wilde head over here. I can't wait to see it. It's a new piece of public art by Sir Eduardo Luigi Paolozzi, CBE. Thank you to the Paolozzi Foundation for their support and work on this project. It's been a long time coming and we've finally made it here, so that's great. I look forward to the community being able to enjoy this piece of art and remember the amazing works of Oscar Wilde, many of which were penned right here in Chelsea. So please do welcome the next couple of speakers, and I can't wait to see it. I hope you all love it and have a great afternoon.
Well, this is exciting. Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. My name is Gyles Brandreth, and I'm the president of the Oscar Wilde Society, which is how I come to know that today is Oscar Wilde's birthday. And consequently, I have brought the birthday cake. My wife said to me, "Oh, you're wearing your birthday jumper." She said, "Thank goodness you're not wearing your birthday suit." I'm thrilled and excited to be here. This part of London was so important to Oscar Wilde during some of the most creative and happiest years of his life. As most of you will know, he and his wife acquired a house in Tite Street, not far from here, and some of the people who live in that house are here with us this afternoon. And they made it the most beautiful house. Indeed, they made it the house beautiful. And there they lived with their two young sons. And Oscar had and enjoyed some of his happiest times entertaining some remarkable people. So thanks to Oscar Wilde coming through down the King's Road, usually in a horse-drawn vehicle of some kind, though occasionally people would come from the West End on the London Underground, the tube, which was already introduced. It wasn't yet called the Twopenny Tube, but even in the 1880s, 1890s, Oscar Wilde would use the tube to get from here, walk down here, go to Sloane Square, and take the tube to Charing Cross, where, as you know, there is now the Maggie Hamlin statue. So the idea of this link between his entrance to the West End at Charing Cross and his departure from this part of London is rather attractive. We have these two remarkable and interesting works of art at either end of the journey. Is fantastic. Tite Street meant a lot to him. This part of the world meant a lot to him, because this part of the world contained all sorts of elements of the world. This wasn't the West End, though there were West End people who came here. This was more bohemian. Of course, there were great artists who lived here in the street of infinite possibilities. If you don't know about it, Devon Cox has written the ultimate book that tells you all about it. So it'd be people like Sargent, artists like that be coming along here. Guests of Oscar Wilde, people like Sir Henry Irving and Ellen Terry would be coming along here to visit them in Tite Street. But the road behind Tite Street was essentially a row of tenement houses with people living very poor, meager lives, with their living off the chickens, and sometimes there were pigs, that they had in their backyards. So it was this mixture of comfort, wealth, and poverty side by side. Gentlemen, ladies, grand people, and, well, low-life people. And I think the combination would very much have attracted Oscar Wilde. Curiously, in Tite Street, I think I'm right in saying, the judge who presided over one of the trials, indeed the judge who sentenced Oscar Wilde in 1895 to 2 years of hard labour, was actually a neighbour of his in Tite Street. So the whole story happens in this part of the world. Well, this is a lovely place to be, this lovely green here. Dovehouse Street, I first came here many years ago to meet Emlyn Williams. So this is very much a theatrical setting. This also, it's in this street, that there was the Chelsea Arts Club many years ago. And it was at the Chelsea Arts Club that there was an interesting dinner that was held. And at this dinner was Oscar Wilde, with a number of his friends. Sitting next to him was Arthur Conan Doyle, who, as we know, was a real friend of Oscar Wilde's, but created the myth that is Sherlock Holmes. Sitting next to him was a man called Hornham, who created Raffles, the Gentleman Cracksman. and happened to be the brother-in-law of Conan Doyle. Also there was Bram Stoker. Bram Stoker was there because he was the manager for Henry Irving, and Conan Doyle was hoping that Henry Irving would play Sherlock Holmes on stage. He didn't, but that's why he was there. Bram Stoker, of course, later creates the great myth that is Dracula. Also at this same time, in this street, think of it, in this street also was Robert Louis Stevenson, before he left the country, who gave us Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And finally, we've got these 6 people around one table. Of course, Oscar had to have next to him the youngest person there. Not necessarily the most amusing, though I think he was quite droll in a quiet way, but certainly the youngest, and in a way, to Oscar, the most fascinating, the young J.M. Barrie, who created Peter Pan. So there you have, in this street, the King's Road, the original Chelsea Arts Club. It moved to its present address in 1902. It was founded in 1890. There you have, sitting around one table, the person who created Sherlock Holmes, Raffles the Gentleman Cracksman, Bram Stoker, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, Peter Pan, and ultimately Oscar Wilde, who created the myth that is Oscar Wilde, and also, of course, created that extraordinary myth of the portrait in the schoolroom at the top of the house. 6 myth makers at one table in this street. What was there in the fog of London in the 1880s and 1890s that enabled these 6 people to create characters and worlds that are alive to us still? Here we are in 2024. It's beyond belief. But I like to think it's something to do with being in Chelsea. This is a lovely part of the world. Like Lady Wilde, Oscar's mother, I've lived in Oakley Street. Almost everybody here will have lived in Oakley Street. It's essential during one's lifetime to have had a little spell there. And so we are remembering not just Oscar Wilde, but the world and the times that enabled him to be the artist that he was. And also, I think it's good to remember him and the happy days. We so often view Oscar through the prism of his downfall. And his early years here, the happiness he had in his wife, whom he loved, and his children, whom he adored, was great. And it was here that he wrote The Importance of Being Earnest, the picture of Dorian Gray. This is a wonderful place to be and to celebrate him, to have people trolling up and down this street singing, what is this? Who is that? What's it about? They'll come closer because it won't be instantly recognizable to them who it is, what it's supposed to be. But they will look at it and they'll be intrigued, oh yes, Oscar Wilde. Now, Christopher's going to tell us a little bit about the great sculptor, the artist who created this, and then together we have the great honor of unveiling it. And you will go wild, I hope, with excitement. But as you look at it, I want you to bear in mind some words of Oscar Wilde's that are relevant to this piece of art. All art, and the joy of Oscar Wilde, and of being the president of the Oscar Wilde Society, is there is a quote from Wilde for every occasion. Absolutely. He was the character who said, never commit murder, said Oscar Wilde. Never commit murder. A gentleman should never do anything he cannot talk about at dinner. But I wanted a quotation that was relevant to today's work of art, and it's this. All art is at once surface and symbol. Those who go beneath the surface do so at their peril. Those who read the symbol do so at their peril. It is the spectator and not life that art really mirrors. So what you're about to see, though it is a tribute to Oscar Wilde, is actually about all of you. Oscar Wilde is still part of us. On his 170th birthday, we can salute the genius that was Oscar. Thank you.
Follow that. Thank you very much, Gyles. Welcome to this unveiling on in Eduardo's 100th year, Eduardo Paolozzi's 100th year, as well as being Oscar Wilde's 170th. Quite a double bill. And we're here for the unveiling, and he's the 5th myth maker, to add to the 4 that you mentioned, or is it the 6th? What we're here to unveil is not a monument, it's not a memorial, and it's not a statue. It's a sculpture, an important distinction, a public sculpture. And as Oscar Wilde wrote in Dorian Gray, any work of art that's created with feeling, even a portrait, if it's worth its salt, is really about the artist who created it, as much as about the sitter. So this sculpture is simultaneously in honour of Oscar Wilde, inspired by Oscar Wilde, and about Oscar Wilde. About Oscar Wilde and about Eduardo Paolozzi, both of them larger than life in every sense, both of them giants. So yes, the sculpture has the famous hairstyle, as you'll see, the big face, the suit and the tie with the big knot, and Oscar's name in hot metal type on its base with some stray letters which have fallen off as well. So it is a head of Oscar Wilde, it's a likeness, but it's also about Oscar Wilde's ambiguous place in modern culture and how we see him today. The relationship, as Gyles has said, between Oscar Wilde and the spectator. And of course, it's unmistakably about Eduardo as well. As Paolozzi liked to say, it was one of his favourite lines, art is a short word that should be stretched much further. Eduardo once said of the memories evoked in him by the most important places in his life, he said this: walks in all weathers at all times of the year in Paris along the Seine or in the Jardin du Luxembourg freeze for me into Pizarro or Vuillard. And on a bus down Sloane Street, the imagery evokes a play by Oscar Wilde. Life imitating art, imitating life. The mannequins in Sloane Street shop windows being assembled, heads, bodies, legs and arms, and then dressed in their elaborate couture outfits. The glittering hotel lobbies next to a building site and some for sale signs. The well-turned-out visitors showing off their latest purchases and branded carrier bags, all stopping to let a bus go by, and the gossiping Sloane Rangers, all evoked for Eduardo the studied artificiality of Oscar Wilde's plays, the theatre of modern city life. On one occasion in 1987, I remember it well, he caught sight of a window dresser in Harrods placing a plaster cast head of Michelangelo's David onto a muscular tailor's dummy. And Eduardo arrived at the Royal College up the way, in David Queensberry's department, arranged to borrow the head, made a mould of it and cast of it, and then, with the technicians and students, proceeded to fragment it and make it look, as he said, like a pixelated head on a computer screen, by slicing it vertically and horizontally and wedging wooden blocks in the slices. Which is, he reasoned, how most students these days actually saw Michelangelo's David, on a screen, and now as a sculpture in the age of mechanical reproduction. Paper collage is accepted by everyone, he once said in a lecture. What about collage in sculpture? Beyond recreating a likeness, with parts of experience pressing through, the world taken apart and reassembled. Collage, for Eduardo, was a practice which went right back to his earliest works, the cut-up Time magazine covers of the late 1940s and early 1950s, where he took portrait heads and collaged them on the flat, which he said was a kind of metaphor for the creative act. And his creative act, for sure, because Eduardo actually couldn't stop collaging. For those who knew him well, he was doing it all the time. If any of you ever tried to watch a television program with Eduardo, it was completely maddening, because you'd be watching, say, a British costume drama, and at a certain point he'd grab the channel hopper and click and turn to another channel. He said, "What is that? I want to know who done it, Eduardo." That was a really strong image, Chris. He collaged all the time, and on one occasion he arrived at Bath Station to visit us, and he had in his hand a copy of the biography of George Orwell by Bernard Crick. And as he handed it to me, he tore a page out of it. He said, "This is a really interesting page, I'd like to keep this." So I'm the proud possessor of George Orwell, A Life with one page missing. Eduardo could not stop collaging. And he'd been particularly struck, round about the time he produced the maquette for this, by a photo he'd seen of Rodin's studio, with bits of sculptures lying around, variations on portraits, work in progress, first thoughts which Rodin had retained. He was also very struck by the fragments of Greek sculpture, many of them defaced by subsequent generations, in the Glyptotek Museum in Munich, his favourite museum in the world, where he was a professor and where I in fact taught with him. And then, just round the corner in Dovehouse Street, you only had to visit Eduardo's studio full to the rafters with the accumulated bits and pieces of 20th century high and low culture, things and papers. A bit like Sebastian's replicant workshop in the film Blade Runner, which Eduardo identified with hugely. And as Eduardo once said, just getting up in the morning, he lived in the studio, just getting up in the morning was like being an archaeologist on a dig, full of surprising connections and juxtapositions. And that was before he made breakfast. All this stuff that was around him, he was collaging all the time. He didn't like being labelled the father of pop, as he has been labelled in one or two newspaper articles recently. He much preferred the description radical surrealist. A surrealist who wasn't as interested in the inner person, the fantasies and dreams and imaginations of individuals, as the relationship between the inner person and the cultural bloodstream, the way the inner person interacted with the world around them, and latterly through the mass media. How did that process work? How did famous celebrities interact with the culture that surrounded them? And how did that last? How does celebrity happen? Hence Eduardo's fascination with Oscar Wilde, the man who is said to have invented modern celebrity and who is of course brilliant at reinventing himself as a brand. The perfect start for some discourse on celebrity. Oscar Wilde, the flaneur who, as he wandered around London, around the London which Gyles has evoked so well, once noted, and here's a quote from Oscar Wilde, "In looking around at the figures which adorn our parks, one could almost wish that we had killed the noble art of sculpture completely. To see the statues of our departed statesmen in marble frock coats and bronze double-breasted waistcoats adds a new horror to death." Now, given some recent attempts to produce figurative sculpture and statues in London and in other parts of the UK, I think, well, most of which have about as much life in them as an Airfix kit, I think we can all agree with Oscar, and I'm sure you know who I mean. In his famous lecture at the Royal Academy Schools in June 1883, Oscar Wilde said to the combined students, "You mustn't judge by appearances. You mustn't make snap judgments based on preconceptions. You mustn't be slaves to cliché and to custom." And that's the starting point for any artist. Another quote, "The commonplace character of so much of our English art seems to me due to the fact that so many of our young artists look merely at what we may call ready-made beauty and take it for granted. In other words, they should be more attentive. They should learn to look as well as to see." And that's an observation of Oscar Wilde's that reminds me of one of Eduardo's favourite cartoons, which he'd cut out from the New Yorker, dating from the mid-1950s. And it showed a couple of harassed American tourists rushing up the steps of the Louvre in Paris and saying to the security man, "Where's the Mona Lisa? We're double parked." The looking as well as seeing. Now, I think that Eduardo's head of Oscar Wilde is at some level in conversation with the defaced Jacob Epstein stone sculpture in Père Lachaise, only without the angel of creativity this time flying from a huge block, which Eduardo considered a bit of a cliche. But what he identified with was the fact that the Epstein had been defaced, and he wanted to question why that should be. You probably remember that the angel's stone testicles were removed. And it had also become adored, that one of the problems with the sculpture was so many people left lipstick tracings all over both the plinth and the angel, to the point where now it has to be behind glass. He was fascinated with the defacing, and he was fascinated with the fact that a sculpture that was vilified when it first opened, in August 1914, would you believe, that's when it was unveiled, should become so loved over the generations. That intrigued him. I think this is also in discussion, in conversation with Francis Bacon's fragmented portraits, with their spatial ambiguity. And of course, they are the subjects of an exhibition that's about to open at the National Portrait Gallery, Francis Bacon's portrait. Bacon was the contemporary artist Eduardo rated more highly than any other, because, as he put it, he was absolutely free of cliché. And of course, it's in conversation with the portrait heads which Eduardo produced round about the mid-1990s, and in particular his bronze Mr. Hyde, which was his comment on Victorian double standards, and like a lot of his heads, a realignment of Cubist ways of seeing. Finally, a couple of weeks ago, this sculpture, wrongly labelled in my view as a monument or statue, was criticised for being too modern in its treatment. Not heritage enough, not feel-good enough, not light-hearted enough. So I'd like to finish with a quotation about Eduardo Paolozzi as one of the giants of 20th century art. In short, about the importance of being Eduardo. There could not be a more complete modern artist than he, because he possesses the strength and appetite to hoover up, as it were, the whole of contemporary reality, mix it with a brooding historical awareness, and almost instantly reassemble it into imagery that is by turns comical, ironic, erudite, disconcerting, monumental, enigmatic, lyrical, generous, multi-evocative, one of his favourite words, and always handsome when not curiously beautiful. There could be no more complete modern artist than he. I'm only sorry that Eduardo isn't with us today to enjoy this ceremony. He'd have been so pleased that it was happening. But sadly, we're 19 and a half years too late for that. So ladies and gentlemen, I'm absolutely delighted with Gyles' help to be unveiling the head of Oscar Wilde, posthumous sculpture by Eduardo Paolozzi. Thank you very much.
Well, of course you are. You can sit on it. Sit on it. It was designed to be sat upon. Outside the Man in the Moon Theatre, which used to be a corner park walk. My name is Vicky. Those of you that don't know me, I was Eduardo's secretary for the last 7 or 8 years of his life, including when he could work no longer. I think he and Oscar are looking down on us today, and I think they're winking at each other, and although they looked totally different, Eduardo was as scruffy as they came, Oscar was as elegant as they come, and I think they would have got on very well.
Forgive us, we're doing a selfie. Oscar would have approved.
He would have, so would Eduardo. He liked technology. I have a few thanks to make on this auspicious day. Firstly, to the Royal Borough for their incredible enthusiasm and support from the word go since I showed them the maquette this size, which Eduardo gave me, of Oscar, and said to me, as he'd said, bring your car today, Vicky, when you're sign, bring the letters to sign. I've got something for you. So when I arrived in the car, I usually went on my bicycle, he walked out with the maquette. I opened the boot, put it in, and he looked at me and said, be careful with it. Well, I was careful with it, and that's the result today. And as I say, the Royal Borough have been amazing and in all their support, and I can't thank them enough. And I just hope that people will really appreciate it and it will grow on people. The next people I have to thank very sincerely are the church, because this is church property and is consecrated ground. So we had to ask permission from the church, and my friend Brian Leetard, who's around somewhere, I went to see, arranged an appointment to see him. I think he was a bit worried when I said, can I come and see you for 5 minutes? Oh yes, okay, come. I said, now, how would you feel about a statue of Oscar Wilde on Dovehouse Green? He said, well, personally, Vicky, I'm all for it, but it's not up to me. We'll have to ask the faculty for permission, and this could take a while, maybe a year. Well, actually, it took 2 years. But if something's worth doing, it's something worth waiting for. And I'm happy to say the faculty were unanimous eventually in their approval, and that's why we are able to have this statue here today, which is lovely. And the Paolozzi Foundation was another organisation I had to approach, because Eduardo, having left all his copyright to the foundation, had to have permission for the project to go ahead. I'm happy to say that I spoke to Adrian Barr-Smith, and he got everybody on side, and they too, particularly Adrian, have been fantastic supporters of the work. The Chelsea Society, thank you for first commissioning the statue, because without which we wouldn't be here today. So big thanks to the Chelsea Society for their vision in commissioning this work. Pangolin, wonderful Pangolin, the foundry in Stroud, who produced from that tiny maquette this amazing piece of sculpture, just wonderful. Ringway Kingdom, who was an old friend of Eduardo's, founded the original foundry, and now it's a huge operation in Stroud, putting out the most wonderful works of art all over the world, including Oscar. Tom, who's here somewhere, saw this project, was also overseeing the wonderful memorial to the First World War soldiers, recently unveiled in Washington, D.C. And they do produce exemplary work, and thank you all, every technician, everyone who did the patination, all the technicians who were able to build up in size from maquette to this size. Thank you very much. MTech, who installed it on Thursday last. What technicians, what professional people they are. They did it in no time at all. It was a huge operation, and it was magic to watch, actually. It really was, how to maneuver a piece of that weight and size so beautifully into place without a hitch. It was just amazing. Thank you, MTech. Well, thank you all for coming. I look at the sea of faces. I hope you like the sculpture. Thank you, Gyles. Thank you, Chris. Thank you to the Deputy Mayoress. Is she here still, or has she had to go? I can't see her. Thank you, Laura, very much. And mostly thank you all, individual, friends, family, for being such wonderful supports. But most of all, thank you, Oscar, and thank you, Eduardo.